Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm a data nerd, and I absolutely love charts and graphs. They're a great way to analyze and assess the performance of a client recruitment campaign or in evaluating Workology's own digital performance and downloads. Data is everything in business, which is why it shouldn't be a surprise that accessible data visualization is also something we should be considering as businesses make strides in our workplaces as well as digital resources become more accessible. This podcast is sponsored by Clear Company and is part of our Future of Work series in partnership with PEAT, the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology. So we're going to be talking about data visualization and how to make it accessible. Today I'm joined by Doug Scheppers. He is the Chief Technologist at Viz Studio, which is a consultancy for creating a better way to create and explore information graphics. They create custom solutions for making data visualization accessible to all users, including people with disabilities. Doug, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Hi, Jessica. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I started programming when I was 12, I think, on a TRS-80 and a Commodore 64. And then years later, I picked it up again in the mid-90s when I realized that you didn't need formal training or math skills to be successful as a programmer. And when I was at a financial planning company, I started working on my own charting library using SVG, Scalable Vector Graphics, this web vector graphics format that had just emerged. And from there, I started a consultancy with a few other folks, and then I joined a startup. And then I got hired at W3C, which is the Web Standards organization that defines HTML and SVG and also WCAG, the accessibility guidelines. And so I worked there for about a decade, and I collaborated there with a lot of people who themselves had disabilities or who were accessibility experts. And when I was working on standards there, that's when I got this idea for how we can make data visualizations accessible. And I started writing up standards for how to do that, and it wasn't really going anywhere. And I realized I was trying to push a rope. In other words, standards is really driven by implementations, by software. And I realized that if I wanted to make this succeed, I couldn't just write a specification for how it should work. I needed to write the software itself. And I got more and more into that, and I realized, hell, there's a real need here. So I created a startup, Viz Studio, and that's exactly what we do. We're aiming at making data visualizations accessible to everyone.
Awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about the growth and demand for accessible data visualization. How important is this to business strategy, and how does it overlap with where technology is headed in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the rate of data collection is basically exponential. It's doubling every 2 years. And what does that mean? It means that 90% of the data that's in the world today was generated over the last 2 years alone. And that same trend has been going on for the last 20 years. That is just an enormous amount of data to deal with as a society, right? How do we use that data? How do we see patterns and trends in it? And one of the ways that we do that is we use data visualizations, charts and graphs, mostly bar charts, line charts, pie charts, but also maps, scatter plots, parallel points, many other chart types. And we use this to see these trends that we couldn't perceive in the data otherwise. You can see a trend much more easily in a line chart than you can in a spreadsheet. Some people have had this misperception that you can't make charts accessible, but in fact, it's just the opposite. Data visualizations are accessibility technology. They're cognitive accessibility technology. They help us leverage one of our senses, in this case, sight, to enhance the limitations of our minds, limitations in terms of memory, in terms of pattern recognition, all sorts of other things. Basically, data visualizations are inherently more accessible for sighted people than data tables are. And so we just need to think about, okay, so if we got this one sense, how can we use other senses to also improve accessibility of this data? Also, going along with that information overload that we have, there's attention overload. It's difficult to get people's attention and to keep it long enough to impart a lasting message, something that they understand quickly and that they will carry with them. So eye-catching charts and graphs they provide a sort of novelty to help people meet that goal. And so a lot of people, a lot of businesses are increasingly using data visualizations for these reasons, among others. And from a business perspective, you can look at it two ways. One is, how does that limit my own business? If my charts aren't accessible, how does it limit my own business in terms of meeting the needs of my customers or my employees? What money am I leaving on the floor? What workers am I missing out on hiring? Keeping in mind that half of all blind people in the United States are unemployed partly because they don't have the right tools at work to be able to perform the tasks they need to be able to perform. And the second thing that you need to think about is, what risks am I opening my business up to by not making my content accessible? So it's not just people with disabilities that benefit from these charts, and we can touch on that later.
So what's involved in making data accessible? Can you kind of walk us through the process and what it looks like?
Sure. First off, people aren't making their charts by hand anymore, right? They used to. They used to draw them out on graph paper with a ruler, but nobody's doing that anymore. They're using software to make their data visualizations. So for the content creator or the developer, the software developer, the process is no different for making accessible charts than for making inaccessible charts. You're already using software. Just use software that makes charts accessible by default. Like the product we make is Viz Charts. Creates charts that are just born accessible. You just add the data, select the chart type you want, select the colors, style preferences, and so on. And the result is simply accessible out of the box. No need for the user to do anything extra. I mean, picking colors, yeah, you do need to be careful about the colors you pick for color blindness, but we even guide you through that process. As far as the technology aspect, how do we do this from a technology perspective? First, we embed the data directly into the file. That's typically SVG on the web, but you could theoretically embed the data in a PNG or JPEG file as metadata. And this metadata doesn't only have to include the raw data, but also like any textual descriptions that you want, summaries, human-generated or auto-generated. This technique, by the way, we call this deep graphics. It's the technique of embedding the extended content as metadata. It's deep graphics is a way of preserving context. It also improves your search engine optimization, your SEO. It makes your data reusable. People can extract the data from one chart and the data from another chart and add them together to make a new chart. Anyway, so once this data is in the file in a structured way, the user can just navigate through each individual data point, find out step by step what, day by day, whatever, data point by data point, what the values are. They can explore the chart as much as they like. But on top of that, we extract that data and we add additional context, like the ability to quickly and easily compare two different bars. We use natural language generation to create sentences and options in text, and those can be voiced by screen readers or rendered in Braille readers. So from the end user's perspective, making charts accessible is just sort of following the instructions, following your nose to navigate around the chart, answer some options or select some options, and it's a really intuitive experience for anybody who uses accessibility technology like a screen reader.
Can you share a case study or example of how accessible data visualization has maybe helped one of your clients?
Sure. So one of my clients, for example, they run an accessibility testing service, and it's a site that helps other people make their websites accessible. It's a little bit meta, So they use our charts to present the numbers of the checks that were performed on the site. They have a little dashboard that explains to you, that shows you how many of your web pages were checked, how many passed, the rate of errors, is it hopefully decreasing, etc. So they wanted the users to have not only access to the day-to-day numbers, like the individual numbers, but they wanted to find out the trend as well. So, is your site getting better? Is it getting worse? This customer knew that for their users and for credibility, they need to do more than just check the box for accessibility. So they used our charts, and provides a much better experience than just a data table. And there are lots of charting solutions out there that are starting to emerge. Any business should be able to find a charting package that does things accessibly. When you talk about accessibility, there's a whole bunch of different considerations. It's not just blind people, it's low vision people. And SVG, which is the format we use, is really great for that because it lets people zoom in, but you still want to have the context of what you're zooming in on. Zooming in on a dot doesn't tell you anything. You need to know the values, you need to know the range, and so on. So there's cognitive accessibility as well. There's a whole bunch of other types of accessibility that are served beyond just blindness. And so we try to take all of those into consideration.
Working with P has been such an eye-opener as far as as much as how far we have to go when it comes to accessibility in our workplaces. In addition to helping people with low vision, how can we take these complex charts, graphs, and images and make them easier for people who have cognitive disabilities?
That's a great question. First off, we all are sometimes challenged with cognitive limitations, especially when we're stressed or busy or distracted or in a hurry or whatever. Data visualization is great for that because it can help communicate complex ideas quickly. And there are times when you definitely need to use complex charts and images, when the data or the relationships between factors are really complex, like in some scientific papers. You need to represent them accurately. And that's also the case when you're doing exploratory data visualization, when you're looking for patterns, as opposed to explanatory data visualization, where you're telling other people a story, revealing to them a pattern you've already discovered. Most of the time, people are doing explanatory data visualization. And when you're doing that, you're better off refining the data to its core message and minimizing the complexity of the chart. I've seen some charts out there that are just, I do data visualization for a living, and I sit there and I look at that chart and I'm lost. I don't know what you're trying to tell me. And oftentimes they're just adding too many extra details in there that I don't need to know in order to get the data in order to get the information. So I have a little mantra. You should, when you're doing data visualization, you should think of it as writing a poem, not a novel. To communicate more complex ideas, you should consider representing it as multiple related, simpler charts, like a dashboard. And once you've done that, once you've boiled the idea down to its essence, you're probably meeting the needs of a broader audience, including a lot of different types of cognitive disability. There are other things you can do for cognitive disability. For one thing, data visualizations for some people are much easier to understand, and for other people are very, very difficult to understand. They don't understand the relationship of the visual to the data. And by providing the option to have it either as a textual description, where you're describing what's going on in the chart, or a visual, or a combination of both, which is what our charts offer. You let somebody figure out the modality that works for them rather than dictating one modality in particular. Cognitive disability is a very broad subject, and it's getting a lot more attention lately. But I think we're just on the forefront of figuring out where data visualizations can help, or where we need to augment the data visualizations to help with cognitive disability. But it's definitely an area of increased interest.
I was just thinking about a podcast interview that I have where I'm talking with a recruiting and workplace leader who is really passionate about dyslexia and helping managers and employees be able to work together, or you can work with peers who have dyslexia, and their brain thinks and how they process information is very different than somebody who doesn't have dyslexia.
Yeah, I actually have a nephew who has profound dyslexia. His dyslexia takes the form of my sister, his mom, told me she was floored when she was talking to him as he was a kid. And he said, "How do you get them to stop moving?" for him, it wasn't just the BPDQ thing, right? The letters were actually moving around on the page and sometimes off the page. And so for him, it was very difficult for him to find a way forward. He's a very intelligent guy, and he ended up now he's a video editor in Hollywood.
That's exactly almost the same thing that Will talked about in the interview. So I think that it's important to be aware of how our different abilities and disabilities, and maybe how we learn and prefer to receive information. Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you're listening to the Workology podcast. Today we are talking with Doug Scheppers about accessible data visualization. This podcast is sponsored by Clear Company, and it is part of our Future of Work series in partnership with the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology, or PEAT.
Podcast support provided by Clear Company. Clear Company is a complete talent management platform used by human resources professionals to help them hire, retain, and engage A players with ease. Visit clearcompany.com to sign up for a free personalized demo.
I want to take a step back a bit and give some people some background. You mentioned this at the beginning of the interview about the standards and guidelines for WCAG. And we've had Dan Ellerman, who is the Inclusion and Diversity Senior Manager at Accenture, on the Workology podcast previously. And I'm going to link to Dan's interview. And I think that Dan gave us a nice overview of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Can you give us maybe some more background on that and how it covers data visualization?
So right now, WCAG 2.1, which is the most recent version, it doesn't explicitly define any checkpoints around data visualizations separate from images. In other words, it doesn't have specific guidance, right? They have one requirement that's applied to all non-text content. It's section 1.1.1, non-text content in WCAG 2.1. And it just says provide a text alternative for complex images. They do go into a little more detail in some of their supporting documentation. They suggest that for data visualization, you give a short description by default and then give an optional longer description, and that you provide like a data table giving access to the raw data. I think that's lacking. Honestly, I just don't feel it's good enough for a couple of reasons. One, a data table just isn't as accessible as a chart. We've touched on this before. It's not the same experience to have a big spreadsheet of populations or whatever versus looking at a line chart and being able to just see trends right away. It doesn't give the same affordances. It doesn't reveal the data in an equivalent way. And it doesn't give the AT user the ability to perform tasks nearly as quickly or efficiently as a sighted user. There's a lot of cognitive overhead that goes along with that kind of description. And the two, textual descriptions, textual summaries are not structured. They're not explorable. Data visualizations are kind of language. They have a nuance and expressivity that you cannot capture with a sentence or even a paragraph of text. So to reflect this, I think that WCAG should add some additional success criteria for data visualizations apart from other image types. And I think some people there are receptive to that. I think one of the barriers to that in the past has been that it is perceived that data visualizations can't be made accessible. And my company and several other companies have showed that, yes, in fact, data visualizations can be accessible. So there are some other things going on. Some of us are working towards this goal. I'm chairing a committee in the Benetech Diagram Center that's aimed at defining how to make data visualization accessible in a more formal way. And we do plan to bring that to work to W3C when we feel it's matured, like we've got a good, solid project. And I'm working on a chapter for a Diagram Center report right now aimed at describing accessible data visualizations for teachers, parents, and people with disabilities, sort of in an education context. And that should be published in the next few months. So people who are interested in that should go to Benetech's Diagram Center. I'm sure you can provide a link, and they should look for more information there. But apart from all of that, the ADA, Section 504, Section 508, other legal requirements, they're not strictly tied to WCAG. There's a large degree of interpretation there. So this misperception that data viz can't be made accessible, and therefore it's been given a free pass, a free ride by even by some accessibility auditors, that's shifting. Those of us making accessible charting software are changing that perception and raising that bar. So pretty soon, formal standards or not, auditors, like accessibility auditors and courts, are going to start requiring that charts be made accessible. So it's a good idea for companies to get ahead of that.
In our prep call and in the previous question, you mentioned data visualization as a language. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by this?
Yeah, sure. So there's a structure to a data visualization. It's got distinct visual elements that have a specific meaning within a context, and you can combine them together to communicate meaning. Like, for example, the height of a bar in a bar chart indicates the relative value within the range indicated by the axes. So that basic principle carries over to stacked bar charts, to grouped bar charts, to Gantt charts, and so on. So just like we weren't born with natural language, we're not born knowing how to read a chart or to create a chart for that matter. We have to be taught this. This is it's a skill that we learn. But once we understand how to map values like size, position, color, shape to numerical values or to categorical values, then we can figure out how to apply that to chart types we've never even seen before, because we rely on these familiar elements. In the data viz field, it's common to say, the data visualization field is common to say that a data visualization is a story about data. I like to think that a data visualization is a user interface to data. Each type of chart is like specialized for accomplishing particular tasks. And so we look on our job as providing affordances that work for multiple senses, not just vision, to provide equivalent ways to accomplish those tasks for each different chart type.
One technology that is really changing things lately has been voice assistants like Siri or Alexa. And I personally am increasingly relying on these to help me in everyday life, from adding calendar invites, listening to my news, and even voice to text. Heck, Alexa turned on my TV for me yesterday, which I finally figured out how to do that, and I was super excited. Can you talk about how these voice assistants are impacting data visualization technology for both people with and without disabilities?
That's a great question. Everything old is new again. We think of voice interfaces as being this amazing new thing that never existed before, but it's really, computers have finally caught up to sort of the primary thing that humans do, which is to communicate information, which is voice, is communication, is conversation. So it's speech and conversation. It's the oldest method of communicating information. It's older than touch interfaces. It's older than keyboard and mouse. It's older than reading and writing. It only seems new to us because it's actually hard for computers to do, because our brains are really specialized at this. It seems easy to us because we're sort of built to do that. And because we're built to do that, it's really natural for us to use these conversational interfaces. I just think it's funny that you can even think of conversations with other humans as conversational interfaces. And I studied linguistics as in college, so it's an interesting topic for me. Anyway, all the biggest tech companies know this, and they are pushing speech interfaces hard. They all want us to reduce barriers for us to use their services, right? So it's going to happen more and more. And of course, keep in mind that the technology aspect of this all has its roots in accessibility technology, right? This is screen readers writ large, screen readers for sighted people. I know a lot of people with disabilities and who think smart speakers have been a huge convenience for them. Being able to perform tasks, control their environment without having to get up to a wall switch or get on their smartphone and navigate. It's made a big difference in their quality of life. And many of them were already using text-to-speech or voice interfaces, of course. So it's a logical next step for us to provide like a supplementary or even replacement interface for data visualizations. You think about the number of people who are trying to get information on the web or trying to get information in general. And if they encounter, say, your website, what's their experience of that on a smart speaker, on using Siri? What's their experience of the information that you're providing on a device that either doesn't have a screen or where they're not using the screen? So, or where the screen is really tiny, like a smartwatch, right? You want to provide to them some other way of doing this, getting at your data. You're already asking your smart speaker, what's the weather going to be like when you're getting ready for your day? So for many people, it'd be really convenient to ask a smart speaker, what are the sales figures for the week? Or compare this quarter's earnings to the same quarter last year while they're driving or getting dressed or exercising or in the shower or whatever. I don't think that speech interfaces, these smart speakers, are going to replace podcasts on your way to work. But if you're rushing on your way to a meeting and you want to make sure you have your facts straight, being able to just say to your device, hey, give me these figures, give me this information, that could be a real, without having to look at the screen, that could be a real benefit for a lot of users. So we're looking at basically making smart speaker apps for your data as well.
I love that, because I think that that's the world we're in right now. Like if I want to know recipe conversions, or if I want to ask something really specific, I would love to ask my website, hey, tell me about what the definition of accessibility is according to the Workology podcast. I would love for it just to pull it up and say, well, this is what Doug said this means. Maybe that's where we're heading. I really hope so.
I think that you really touched on an interesting point there, which is it's not just that it's not a passive thing, right? It's these smart speakers are not just passively listening. They're not audiobooks, right? They're interactive interfaces, right? You want to be able to basically make your information available to people in a way that they can extract it, so that a computer can extract it and present it to them in the way that they're asking for it to be presented, right? And that's right at the core of speech interfaces. And that's right at the core, ultimately, of what we're doing with these charts, right? Getting at specific information, answering specific questions, not just pushing information at a person.
And details, because when I think about alt tagging, right? Like I can write information into the alt tag from an image that I put on my website, but it doesn't really tell the whole story. And that's what I feel like you're trying to do is help tell the whole story, and in different ways.
If I had, for example, something that had all 50 states, a bar chart that had all 50 states, maybe I'm trying to compare, I don't know, New York and California, right? So I'm looking at a chart and I see New York and California, and those two bars are colored, I don't know, orange, and the rest of the bars are colored blue, whatever. They're drawing attention to those two bars. But I've spent most of my life in Missouri and North Carolina. So I'm probably more interested in those two states. So if the alt text just talked about comparing California and New York, that wouldn't be serving my particular interests, right? So with a bar chart, right, I can personally go in and just look at New York, or Missouri and California and North Carolina, and get that information for myself. And so alt text is not enough. You might not provide all the information. And so that's what our charts do. It lets them get access to the information that they want to get out of that chart, not just the information that you're providing.
I love it. Well, Doug, where can people go to learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
So they can always go to our website. We're revamping the site right now to include some more content, links to videos, conference presentations, and so on. But in the meantime, you can request a demo from our site. It's Fizz Studio, or fizz.studio. And we're a pretty new startup, so we've been concentrating on the software, but not the site, but that's all coming soon. And you can always request a demo. I'd love to show a live demo of what we do. I have a personal Twitter account at Shepazu. That's SHEPAZU, where I talk about tech and accessibility and data viz, but I also talk about politics and non-business topics. So follow me at your own risk. And you can also go to the Benetech website, where we're providing some more information about this. And hopefully soon you can go to W3C and find out more about it, but that's maybe something for the future.
We'll link to Benetech and hopefully that section. I have a podcast interview with Jim also of Benetech. So it's an ongoing topic and conversation, and I appreciate your help in these areas.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is a fascinating discussion and one that I think we are going to see a lot more of as our use of data to drive business decisions continues to grow. I'm also interested in seeing in the coming months and years how audio visual assistants like Siri, Google Home, and Alexa will continue to push forward how we use and add audio in our lives. I use audio for so many different things. Audiobooks, I listen to the news, I send my text message via audio. It's such a great way to kind of like a productivity hack, but I can just get things done. Certainly, I'm invested in the importance of audio as someone who now has 2 different podcasts, the one you're listening to, and a second we launched earlier this year called WORKOLOGY Go podcast, which is a 5-minute, 2 times a week daily news podcast highlighting a single story in the HR and recruiting community. Whatever happens, I'm interested to see the rise of audio and how data sonification and visualization will play into this. This Future of Work series is in partnership with Pete, and it is one of my favorites. Thank you to Pete, as well as our podcast sponsor, Clear Company.
The Workology Podcast Future of Work series is supported by Pete, the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology. Pete's initiative is to foster collaboration and action around accessible technology in the workplace. Pete is funded by the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, ODEP. Learn more about Pete at peteworks.org. That's PEATWORKS.org.